May 5, 1945, a Saturday morning. The sky was clear, the air was warm. The soldiers of the U.S. 11th Armored Division were rolling through Austria. They were following the Danube River through the mountains. They had heard rumors of a prison camp somewhere near the town of Mauthausen. They thought it was a POW facility. They thought they would find captured soldiers, maybe some political prisoners. They had no idea they were driving toward one of the most brutal death camps in Nazi history. As their Sherman tanks climbed the hill toward a massive granite fortress, they saw something that made them stop. Prisoners, thousands of them, pressing against the barbed wire fences. These weren't men, they were living skeletons. An American sergeant looked through his binoculars. He saw watchtowers. He saw massive stone quarries carved into the mountain. He saw bodies, piles of bodies stacked like firewood near the barracks. And then he saw something that made his hands shake. A railroad car near the entrance, abandoned. The door was open. Inside were corpses, small corpses, children. The sergeant lowered his binoculars. He looked at his commander. "Sir, we need to get in there now." The tanks accelerated. They smashed through the outer checkpoint. The SS guards had already fled. The main gate stood open. The prisoners saw the American tanks. They started screaming. Some were crying. Some were laughing hysterically. They rushed toward the Americans, like a wave crashing on a beach. A young private from Minnesota stepped out of his tank. A prisoner grabbed his hand and kissed it. The prisoner was speaking in Polish or Russian. The soldier didn't understand the words, but he understood the tears. The Americans entered the main compound. They saw the barracks, long wooden buildings packed with dying men. They saw the crematorium. The ovens were still warm. They saw the gas chamber, disguised as a shower room. And then they saw the stairs. 186 granite steps carved into the mountain. The stairs of death, where prisoners were forced to carry massive stones until they collapsed and died. One American sergeant sat down on those stairs. This tough combat veteran who had fought from Normandy to the Rhine. He sat down and wept. The American soldiers were liberators. They were heroes. They handed out food. They called for medics. They tried to comfort the survivors. But while they were saving the living, they were also hunting the guilty. The SS guards had vanished. Most had stripped off their uniforms. They had changed into civilian clothes. They were trying to blend in with the population. But there was one man the Americans wanted more than anyone else. Franz Ziereis, SS Standartenführer, the commandant of Mauthausen. He was the architect of this death machine. He had commanded the camp for 7 years. He had overseen the murder of nearly 200,000 human beings. And on the morning of May 5th, just hours before the Americans arrived, he had done what cowards do. He ran. This is the true story of the Mauthausen liberation manhunt. The day American soldiers became hunters. The day they tracked a fleeing Nazi commander through the Austrian Alps. The day they cornered him in a mountain cabin. The day they shot him. And the day Franz Ziereis learned that you cannot escape justice. Franz Ziereis was not a stupid man. He was calculating. He was methodical. He was a killer with a plan. He had joined the SS in 1936. He was a true believer in Nazi ideology. He worked his way up through the concentration camp system. He started at Dachau. By 1939, he was given command of Mauthausen, and he transformed it into one of the deadliest camps in the entire system. Mauthausen wasn't designed for labor. It was designed for extermination through labor. The prisoners worked in the granite quarry. They cut massive stones for Hitler's buildings. They worked 12-hour shifts. They were given 300 calories a day, starvation rations. They were beaten if they slowed down. They were shot if they collapsed. Ziereis called it destruction through labor. He was proud of his efficiency. He kept meticulous records of every death. He sent reports to Berlin. He bragged about his kill counts. But Ziereis wasn't just a bureaucrat sitting behind a desk. He was a sadist. He personally participated in executions. Survivors later testified that he would walk through the camp with his pistol, shooting prisoners randomly. For sport, he kept a pet dog, a massive German shepherd. He trained it to attack prisoners on command. He would release the dog into the barracks at night. He would listen to the screams. On Christmas Eve 1944, while prisoners were freezing and starving, Ziereis threw a party for the SS officers in his villa. His villa overlooked the camp. They drank champagne. They ate roasted goose. They laughed and danced, while men died 200 meters away. One survivor remembered looking up at the lit windows of Ziereis's house. He saw him dancing with his wife, while prisoners were being hanged outside. That was Franz Ziereis, a monster who lived like a king while ruling over hell. By April 1945, Ziereis knew the war was lost. The Red Army was coming from the east. The Americans were coming from the west. Berlin was surrounded. Hitler was hiding in a bunker. Ziereis received frantic orders from Himmler. Evacuate the camp. Blow up the barracks with all the prisoners inside. Leave no witnesses. But Ziereis was already planning his escape. He had seen what happened to other camp commanders. He had heard about the reprisals at Dachau. He knew that if he stayed, he would be captured. And if he was captured, he would be hanged. So he made a plan. He gathered his most trusted officers. He told them to prepare escape routes. He packed gold. He packed cash, stolen from murdered prisoners. He loaded a truck with food, weapons, and civilian clothes. And he waited for the right moment. On May 3rd, the Americans were less than 30 kilometers away. Ziereis called a meeting of his senior staff. He told them the camp would be handed over to the Vienna Fire Department. A ridiculous cover story. He told them to burn all the execution records. He told them to scatter, and then he gave the order that would seal his fate. He told the guards to abandon their posts. He told them to change into civilian clothes. He told them to disappear into the population. He was abandoning ship, like a captain fleeing while his crew drowns. That evening, Ziereis went to his villa one last time. He packed his uniforms. He packed his medals. He packed his personal documents. He looked at the camp one final time from his window. Did he feel guilt? Did he feel shame? Survivors who later spoke with him said no. He felt only anger. Anger that Germany had lost. He felt betrayed by Hitler. He felt like a victim. On the morning of May 4th, before dawn, Ziereis slipped out of the camp. He didn't say goodbye. He didn't give final orders. He just left. He drove north into the mountains. He had a small group of loyal SS men with him. He headed toward the Fern Pass, a remote mountain area where he owned a hunting cabin. It was isolated. It was defendable. He thought he could hide there until the chaos settled. He thought he could blend in later as a civilian. He thought he could escape to South America, like other SS officers were planning. He thought he was smart. He thought he had planned everything perfectly. He had no idea the Americans were already looking for him. He had no idea his name was at the top of a very special list. When the 11th Armored Division liberated Mauthausen on May 5th, they immediately began interrogating prisoners. The survivors were eager to talk. They gave names. They gave descriptions. They drew maps of where the SS officers lived. And the name that came up again and again was Franz Ziereis. The prisoners told stories of his cruelty. They showed the Americans the execution wall, the wall where Ziereis had personally shot hundreds of people. They showed them the quarry, the cliff where he had ordered prisoners to be thrown off. They showed them the gas chamber, built in 1941 under his command. The American officers were furious. They had orders to capture SS officers for war crimes trials, but this was personal now. They had walked through the camp. They had seen the mountains of corpses. They had held dying prisoners in their arms. They wanted Ziereis, not for a trial, for justice. The manhunt began immediately. The U.S. Army Counterintelligence Corps took the lead. The CIC. These were trained investigators, not regular combat troops. They spoke German. They knew how to interrogate. They knew how to track. They set up checkpoints on every road. They searched every house. They interrogated every civilian. Where is Ziereis? Have you seen this man? They showed photographs of him in his SS uniform. Tall, thin, cold eyes, sharp nose. The locals were scared. They didn't want to help the Nazis anymore. The war was over. Hitler was dead. Why protect a monster? Tips started coming in. A farmer said he saw SS officers heading north. A shopkeeper said he sold food to men in civilian clothes, men who looked military. A postman said he delivered a package to a hunting cabin in the mountains. The CIC agents followed the leads. They drove into the mountains. The roads were narrow. The terrain was brutal. These were the Alps. Steep cliffs, dense forests, hidden valleys, perfect for hiding. But the Americans were relentless. They split into teams. They searched cabin by cabin. They found several SS officers hiding in barns and basements. They arrested them. But Ziereis wasn't among them. He was smarter. He had gone deeper into the mountains. He had reached his hunting cabin near the Fern Pass. It was a small wooden structure, surrounded by pine trees. No electricity, no running water. But it was remote. It was hidden. Ziereis felt safe. He settled in with his 2 bodyguards. They rationed their food. They kept their weapons loaded. And they waited. But Ziereis made a critical mistake. He trusted his wife. After fleeing the camp, he sent a message to her. She was still in their villa near Mauthausen. He told her to meet him at the cabin. He wanted to escape with his family. His wife, either terrified or disgusted, didn't come. Instead, she was arrested by the Americans. The CIC agents interrogated her. At first, she said nothing. She played the innocent housewife. But the Americans showed her photos. Photos of the camp. photos of the piles of bodies, photos of the children's corpses. They asked her, "Did you know?" She broke. She said yes. She said she had seen the prisoners from her window. She said she had heard the screams at night. And then she told them where her husband was hiding. She gave them the exact location, the hunting cabin near the Fern Pass. She betrayed him to save herself. On May 23rd, 18 days after the liberation, an American patrol was dispatched. It was a small team, 6 soldiers, a lieutenant, a CIC agent who spoke German. They drove as far as they could. Then they continued on foot. They hiked through the forest. They followed a narrow trail. They were armed with M1 Garands and a Thompson submachine gun. They didn't know if Ziereis would surrender or fight. They were prepared for both. As they approached the cabin, they saw smoke rising from the chimney. Someone was inside. The lieutenant signaled his men. They spread out. They surrounded the cabin. They moved silently through the trees. They got into position. And then the lieutenant shouted in German, "Franz Ziereis, come out! You are surrounded. Surrender now." Inside the cabin, Ziereis froze. He looked at his 2 bodyguards, young SS men, fanatics who had sworn to die for the Reich. Ziereis looked at his weapons, a Luger pistol, a Karabiner 98K rifle. He looked at the door. He could hear the Americans outside. He knew he had 3 choices: surrender and face trial, fight and die, or run and try to escape through the back window. He chose to fight. It was the decision of a coward who wanted to go out like a soldier. He grabbed his rifle. He told his bodyguards to prepare. He moved to the window. He looked out. He saw the American soldiers in the trees. He raised his rifle. He fired. The shot echoed through the forest. The Americans returned fire immediately. The firefight was brief and chaotic. M1 Garands cracked. The Thompson roared. Bullets slammed into the wooden cabin. Glass shattered. Wood splintered. Ziereis and his bodyguards fired back. They shot through the windows. They shot through the walls, but they were outnumbered. They were outgunned. One bodyguard was hit in the chest. He fell. The other tried to run out the back door. He was shot in the leg. He screamed. He crawled back inside. Ziereis realized the situation was hopeless. He dropped his rifle. He grabbed his pistol. He tried to make a run for it. He burst out of the front door. He ran toward the trees. He made it about 10 meters. Then he was hit. A bullet from an M1 Garand struck him in the lower back. He fell. He screamed. He crawled. He tried to reach the forest. But the Americans rushed forward. They kicked the pistol out of his hand. They pinned him down. It was over. Franz Ziereis, the commandant of Mauthausen, was captured, wounded, bleeding, and going to die. Ziereis was alive but badly wounded. The bullet had entered his lower back. It exited through his abdomen. It had torn through his intestines. He was bleeding heavily. The American medic looked at the wound. He shook his head. This was a mortal wound. Ziereis would die, but not immediately. He had hours, maybe a day. The Americans dragged him back to the cabin. They radioed for transport. They wanted to get him back to Mauthausen. The CIC agent wanted him alive long enough to talk. The surviving bodyguard was also wounded but stable. The dead bodyguard was left in the cabin. No one cared. The Americans loaded Ziereis into a jeep. He was in agony. He begged for morphine. The Americans refused. They wanted him to feel pain. They wanted him awake. They wanted him to talk. The drive back to Mauthausen took several hours. Ziereis drifted in and out of consciousness. He moaned. He cried. He asked for water. The Americans gave him nothing. When they arrived at the camp, it was late evening. The prisoners who were still there saw the jeep. They saw the wounded man in the back. Someone recognized him. "Ziereis! It's Ziereis!" The word spread like wildfire. The surviving prisoners rushed to the gate. They wanted to see the monster who had tortured them. They wanted to see him suffer. The Americans carried Ziereis into the commandant's office, his own office. They laid him on the floor. They didn't put him on a bed. They didn't make him comfortable. They laid him on the cold stone floor, the same floor where he had signed thousands of death warrants. The interrogation began immediately. The CIC agent sat next to Ziereis. He had a notebook. He had a flashlight. He shined the light in Ziereis' face. He asked questions. Ziereis was dying. He knew it. His intestines were leaking into his abdomen. He was septic. He had hours left. And in those final hours, Franz Ziereis talked. He didn't confess out of guilt. He confessed out of spite. He was angry at the Nazi leadership for abandoning him. He was angry at Himmler for not evacuating him earlier. He was angry at his wife for betraying him. So he talked. He gave names. He gave details. He admitted to ordering the execution of 4,000 Russian prisoners of war. He admitted to ordering the construction of the gas chamber. He admitted to personally shooting prisoners for fun. The CIC agent wrote everything down. He asked about the gas chamber. Ziereis explained it was disguised as a shower room. Prisoners were told they were being deloused. They were locked inside. Zyklon B gas was released through vents. They died in 10 to 15 minutes. He said he watched through a peephole. He said it was efficient. The agent asked about the quarry executions. Ziereis explained that prisoners too weak to work were taken to the top of the cliff. They were told to line up. They were shot in the back of the head. Their bodies fell 50 meters into the quarry below. He said it saved bullets. The agent asked about the medical experiments. Ziereis said Dr. Eduard Krebsbach, the camp doctor, conducted them. They injected prisoners with gasoline to see how long they would survive. They tested new poisons. They dissected living prisoners to study their organs. The interrogation lasted through the night. Ziereis was fading. His voice was getting weaker. His breathing was shallow. But he kept talking. He seemed eager to unload his sins. Or maybe he was just delirious from pain and blood loss. The CIC agent kept asking questions. He asked about the death marches. In the final weeks of the war, as the Allies closed in, Ziereis had ordered the evacuation of thousands of prisoners. They were marched through the snow. No food, no water. Anyone who fell behind was shot. Thousands died on the roads. Ziereis admitted this. He said he was following orders from Berlin. He said he was just doing his duty. The agent asked, "Do you regret what you did?" Ziereis paused. He looked at the ceiling. He said, "I regret that Germany lost the war. I regret nothing else." By morning, Ziereis was barely conscious. His skin was gray. His breathing was labored. The American medic checked his pulse. Weak and irregular. He had maybe an hour left. The CIC agent closed his notebook. He had everything he needed. Ziereis's confession would be used to prosecute other SS officers. It would be evidence at the Nuremberg trials. It would help identify mass graves and execution sites. But there would be no trial for Ziereis himself. He would never stand in a courtroom. He would never hear a judge sentence him to death. He had already been sentenced by the bullet in his back. At approximately 10 a.m. on May 24, 1945, Franz Ziereis died on the floor of his own office. The man who had murdered 200,000 people died slowly, painfully, and alone. The Americans didn't close his eyes. They didn't cover his body. They let him lie there. News of Ziereis's death spread through the camp. The surviving prisoners asked to see the body. The Americans allowed it. A small group of survivors entered the office. They stood over Ziereis's corpse. They looked at the man who had destroyed their lives. They didn't spit on him. They didn't curse him. They didn't need to. He was dead. That was enough. One survivor, a Polish Jew who had survived 4 years in Mauthausen, later wrote something powerful. "When I saw Ziereis dead on the floor, I felt nothing. Not joy, not relief, just emptiness. He had taken so much from us that even his death couldn't give it back." The Americans took photos of the body for documentation. Then they dragged Ziereis outside. They threw him into a mass grave. A grave with other SS guards who had been killed or committed suicide. No coffin. No marker, no ceremony. He was buried like garbage. The manhunt for Franz Ziereis became a legendary story among the liberators. It represented something important to them. Justice. Not legal justice. Moral justice. Ziereis had tried to escape. He had tried to run away from the consequences of his actions, but the Americans hunted him down. They tracked him through the mountains. They cornered him in that cabin. They wounded him, and they brought him back to the scene of his crimes to die. It was poetic. It was brutal. It was necessary. The soldiers who participated in the manhunt never regretted it. They never questioned whether they should have captured him alive. They never wondered if he deserved a trial. They had walked through Mauthausen. They had seen the stairs of death. They had seen the gas chamber. They had held dying children in their arms. Franz Ziereis didn't deserve mercy. He deserved exactly what he got. The liberation of Mauthausen was one of the most significant moments of World War II. It exposed the true horror of the Nazi concentration camp system. It proved that the rumors of mass murder were not propaganda. It showed the world what evil looked like. The American soldiers who liberated the camp carried the memory for the rest of their lives. Many suffered from what we now call PTSD. They had nightmares. They couldn't talk about what they had seen, but they also felt a sense of pride. They had saved lives. They had stopped the killing, and they had hunted down the monsters responsible. The story of Franz Ziereis is a reminder. There is no escape from justice. You can run. You can hide. You can try to blend in, but eventually, the truth catches up with you. And when it does, you will pay the price. Today, Mauthausen is a memorial site. Thousands of people visit every year. They walk through the barracks. They see the quarry. They stand in the gas chamber. They read the names of the dead carved into the walls. There is a memorial to the American liberators. It honors the soldiers of the 11th Armored Division, the men who arrived on May 5th, 1945. But there is no memorial for Franz Ziereis. No plaque, no marker. His grave is unknown and unmarked. He has been erased from history, exactly as he should be. The only place his name appears is in the records of his crimes. He is remembered not as a person, but as a symbol of evil. And that is the justice he deserves, to be forgotten as a man, but remembered as a monster. The story of the Mauthausen manhunt raises difficult questions. Was it right for the Americans to hunt down a fleeing SS commander? Was it justice or revenge? Should Ziereis have been captured alive and put on trial? Or did he get what he deserved in that mountain cabin? These are not easy questions. But consider this. Franz Ziereis had 7 years to show mercy. He had 200,000 opportunities to choose humanity over cruelty. He had countless chances to stop the killing, to refuse orders, to save lives. He chose murder every single time. So when the Americans came for him, when they tracked him through the mountains and shot him in the back, were they wrong? Or were they simply delivering the justice that Ziereis had denied to so many others? History has judged him. He was a coward who ran. He was a killer who died slowly and in pain. And that is his legacy. The soldiers who hunted Franz Ziereis went home after the war. They returned to their farms and factories and families. They tried to forget what they had seen. They tried to move on. But the memory of Mauthausen stayed with them. It haunted them. It changed them. One veteran, a sergeant who participated in the manhunt, said in an interview decades later, "I don't regret shooting Ziereis. I don't regret watching him die. What I regret is that he only died once. For what he did, he deserved to die 200,000 times." That is the anger that liberation brings. That is the rage that comes from seeing pure evil. And that is why the story of Franz Ziereis matters. It reminds us that evil exists. It reminds us that good men sometimes have to do dark things to stop it. And it reminds us that justice, in the end, always finds a way. If you had been there on May 5, 1945, if you had walked through the gates of Mauthausen and seen the mountains of corpses, if you had held dying prisoners in your arms and then you learned that the man responsible was hiding in the mountains, would you have hunted him down? Would you have pulled the trigger? Would you have let him die slowly on the floor of his own office? Or would you have shown him the mercy he never showed to anyone else? Be honest. Let me know in the comments. And if you want to see the story of the Dachau liberation reprisals, where American soldiers lined up SS guards and executed them against a wall, click the video on the screen. Thanks for watching.